We're staying on mute, right?
Yes, please. General, virtual meeting manners, just go ahead and remain on mute unless you're speaking. Feel free also to use the hand raise function if you want to speak up and other people are talking, and we can make sure that we recognize people and go to them.
Okay, I think the recording has started, so I'm assuming the live stream has started as well. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the EPA's Environmental Financial Advisory Board public meeting. My name is Ed Chu, and I'm the designated federal officer for the Environmental Financial Advisory Board, also known as EFAB. Before I officially open the meeting, I want to remind everyone this is a public webinar, and EFAB is a federal advisory committee. It's an independent advisory body chartered under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA, which means that all of our meetings are open to the public and all of our materials are also available online on EPA's EFAB website. This meeting is scheduled to run from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time and is being recorded for later viewing as well. The purpose of our virtual meeting today is for our EFAB opportunity zones and pollution prevention work groups to present and receive feedback on their draft work products. And per this meeting's Federal Register notice, we are not accepting any oral public comments during the meeting. And I will also share that we received 0 written comments prior. For public participants who are viewing this, please submit any questions or comments to our email address, which is efab@epa.gov. Throughout today's meeting, I will ask our board members to please raise their hand by clicking the icon on your screen to ask questions or provide comment, or submit, obviously, your comments or questions via chat box that's available to you. I want to thank all of you, all the EFAB members, EPA staff, and others who were able to join today and who helped us organize this meeting once again. And with that, I will now gavel in this meeting. I didn't bring my gavel with me, so I will gavel in this meeting virtually and turn it over to our chair, Carrie O'Neill. Carrie?
Thank you, Ed, and welcome everybody to today's meeting. As Ed said, I'm Carrie O'Neill, and I'm the chair of EFAB. I'm going to start with a roll call. So when I call your name, please indicate whether you're here, and then we'll move on to our agenda. So first, Ashley Allen Jones.
Hi, here.
Great. Courtney Black. Steve Bonafonte. Angela Montoya Brickmont. Matt Brown.
I'm here, thanks.
Hi, Matt. Stacy Brown.
Yes, I'm here.
Ted Chapman.
Hi, Carrie, I'm here.
Hi, Ted. Al Cho.
Present.
Janet Clements, I believe RSVP'd no, but just checking she's not on the line. Lori Collins.
Here, thank you.
Zach Davidson. Jeff Deal. Sonia Favors.
Present.
Phyllis Garcia.
Here.
Hi, Phyllis. Eric Hangen. Ted Hennepin. Barry Hirsch.
Here.
Great. Craig Holland, RSVP no, just checking he's not on the line. Craig Rinkovich.
I'm here, Carrie.
Hi, Craig. Margot Kane.
I'm here.
Great. Tom Carroll.
I'm here.
Okay. George Kelly.
Here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi, Gwen Keys Fleming.
Here.
Cynthia Kohler. Colleen Kokis.
Here.
Colleen. Joanne Landau. Lawrence Lujan. I thought we saw him log in. Okay. Mariana Peavy.
Present from Idaho.
Great. Dennis Randolph.
Here, Carrie.
Hi, Dennis. Eric Rothstein, RSVP no, checking he's not on the line. Sanjeev Sinha. Bill Stannard.
I'm here, Carrie.
Hey, Bill. Marilyn Wade, RSVP no, checking she's not on the line. Dave Wagner.
Here.
Dave, Gwen Yamamoto Lau.
Here.
Gwen and David Zimmer.
Back from New York, Carrie, but admittedly very tired.
Okay, great to see you again. And Courtney Black, I believe, is on the line. Is
I
that
am.
right?
Good morning
Great.
or
Good
afternoon for you all.
morning. Great. Tara, do we have a quorum?
We do indeed, Carrie.
Great. All right. So Ed, before we dive into the printed agenda, I think you wanted to introduce a new item at the top.
Yes, indeed. And this is something that I just found out yesterday. So as many of you already know, one big part of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is the allocation of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I believe Clean Air Act was amended by inserting Section 134 to allow EPA to implement this particular fund. And again, I'm sure many of you know more than I do on this already. There are a total of about $27 billion that's allocated in this particular fund. And obviously, EPA is given a very tight timeline to implement this. And so I've heard from the agency representative in the Office of Administrator and the Office of Air and Radiation that EPA is very interested in learning more about how we can maximize greenhouse gas reductions, which is the intended use of this money, while ensuring that the investments are managed very responsibly. Obviously, there's our taxpayer dollars, and are able to be leveraged in a way that it could create long-term benefits for greenhouse gas reductions. And the one other bit of background on this is about, as I understand that about 15 billion of the 27 is really targeted towards low-income and disadvantaged communities to implement zero emission technologies and other clean energy and greenhouse gas emissions reduction activities. So that's sort of the general background on this particular fund. But the challenge for the agency is that we have very limited time to implement this. 180 days is what the agency has been charged with. And the fund has to be obligated by the end of fiscal year, as I understand it. I have to clarify this, but I believe it's available to the agency only until September 30th of 2024. So there is a great deal of interest in engaging the members of EFAB to help us in a number of ways. And at this point, what I am being asked to do is, one, obviously gauge interest in whether EFAB would be interested in exploring the idea of taking a charge on regarding the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That's number one. And I'm hoping that the answer to that is yes. And the second part is that if so, because of the time constraint, what I'd like to do is ask all of you to create a very small work group immediately that could start working with the agency leads on this to develop a full charge and a possible set of deliverables that the board could undertake. And because, as I mentioned, the 180 days time frame, if we waited until we met again in October, I think we will lose another few weeks. And so what I have indicated to our EPA clients is that we would like to get engaged in this as quickly as possible. If you're interested, obviously, this is something that I have to keep saying because you have to take a vote on this. So, so the proposal is to have a working group, a subset of you who are interested in this, and I will leave to you, Carrie, how many members, because obviously it's a work group, so it cannot be the entirety of the board or the majority of the board. I think we have to be staying under the, I know there's going to be a lot of interest in this, under the majority threshold, which is the less than half the members. And even then, I think just because of the time frame that we're talking about, we're coming up on holidays, and this is going to be very intense. We would need significant commitment of time from members who would be interested in joining this group. So I'd like to kind of open that up for discussion, but what I'd like to do is not take a lot of time, but quickly get to a vote of whether or not you would agree to take on this charge and to form a work group, and then we can figure out who could volunteer, who would volunteer for the work group and form the work group, and we could probably get started working on this as quickly as this week. That's how urgent this is, but you can also imagine there's a lot of interest in this, so we're going to obviously, because we're a federal advisory committee, it's going to be done in a very transparent way. And so there's going to be some limitations of what we can do in a work group setting as well as with the full board. So the expectation that I have, if you decide to move forward with this, is one, there's going to be pretty intense work group activity that's going on. But I also suspect that we're going to have to do, in addition to one upcoming meeting that we're already planning in person, hybrid meeting when we're planning in October, we will all probably have to get together again on at least another time or two before the calendar year is out, if you decide to take this work on. So that also means that there's going to be some constraint on other work that you have been planning to do and you are doing, because this is really a high priority activity for the administrator's office, and I suspect that it's going to get scrutiny from Congress and as well as from the White House as well. So anyway, with all that said, Carrie, I will turn it over to you. So that's the kind of the state of play on this particular potential charge from the agency.
Thank you, Ed. And I know a number of folks, I think 7 or 8 individuals had reached out to me and Ed and Tara, and some combination of folks expressing interest in working on this if this were to come before EFAB. I think, just kind of lifting up something that you said, Ed, it does, given the compressed timeline, if you're volunteering, this is going to be a lot of work over a short period of time. And for those that are interested but not able to commit a lot of time in a very short period of time, I think what Ed said is really important. The board as a whole will be involved in this, both at the October, whenever we're doing our October meeting and in subsequent meetings that we'll have around this topic. So as board members, you're still able to participate and weigh in and provide feedback on direction and what have you. And that's true of any of our work groups and any of the charges that we work on. Maybe with that, throwing it open.
Carrie, let me just clarify one more thing. The group that I'm asking you to convene today is a group who would explore what
with EPA
like.
what the charge would look like. Come back to the board, which the board would formalize or formally vote on that charge. Exactly.
Right, and because of the nature of the work, as we dig into this, I suspect that there will be enough work to potentially create additional groups that are more specific in topic. I'm just kind of thinking ahead on this. So I suspect that one work group may not be able to tackle the entirety of the set of charges that might potentially come out of this. So
that'll be part of what the work group needs to think through, is how to tackle the work and organize the work with EPA. We have a lot of new members, so just to remind folks of our process. So Ed is asking us to vote on forming a work group, which will, with EPA, come up with a draft charge. That language will come to the board. Ideally, well, we'll see how quickly that can happen. No later, I would assume, than our October meeting, but perhaps before. The board would have an opportunity to weigh in on that, and then the board would vote on whether it becomes a formal charge, and then the work begins. It may be more than one charge, Ed is indicating. So just process for those of you who are new. I remember being new and not understanding, how all these things come to be. Craig Rinkovich, you had your hand up?
Yeah, Carrie, I just wanted to say that this may tie in nicely with the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Committee in terms of, a topic that they had emphasized at the spring meeting.
Yep. I think that's it's an interesting, thing to consider, the overlaps with some of the other work groups that the membership had expressed interest in.
And I also recognize that this is somewhat unusual in that usually we would give you a full background on what the topic is and talk about that. But this one, as you know, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in August. And it's on a very, very tight time frame, because I think the legislative history on this is that they would like us to get this money out to work on, immediately go to projects that are going to reduce greenhouse gases. So I think that there is some urgency in getting the funds out to fund a lot of these and finance a lot of these projects out there. And so, my apologies for not having that background, but I think within the next week or two, we will have a lot more information as we develop the charge on this, that background information that we'll share with all the members as well on this. And I hope at least you'll be able to go to the Inflation Reduction Act. And I know there are lots of information that's already out there on this particular fund. So, and I know, as I said, as Carrie mentioned, there are at least handful of members who've been really writing a lot of notes, both to Carrie and to myself, about their interest in this particular fund.
So given that, and given, in the interest of time, could we ask any members who want to be involved to reach out to myself or Ed? We know the ones who've already expressed interest, and I'm wondering, unless there are any other questions, whether we can take the vote to form the work group, and then we can circle back with those who have already expressed interest and any others who reach out to us, end of day today or tomorrow.
And this is purely for the vote is about the exploratory work.
Yes, the vote is about exploring, taking up a charge. We'll have to write the words down. The group will have to come up with the words with EPA on what the scope of the charge or charges is or are. So seeing no other questions, and again, if for those that have already reached out, we know who you are. If you are interested and have not yet reached out, please do very quickly. And so should we turn it over, Ed and Tara, to you for the mechanics of a vote on exploring a charge on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund?
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to Tara, but I think this might be something that if you do favor creating this work group, if you could just raise your hands, I think Tara could help us count this. A virtual hand, Carrie.
Virtual, oh my God. Now I
So
gotta
we can
figure,
see
I
it on
never
the
remember how to
screen.
do that. I am the worst. Tara, I raised my hand.
Right, everyone just, oh, good, I'm unmuted. Everyone, please just leave them up for a minute so that I can capture this. Thank you. Is anyone who wants to say yay unable to raise their hand in Zoom and would like to verbally say yay?
Tom Carroll would like to do so.
Tom Carroll, got you. Thank you, Tom.
Dave Wegner, yay.
Dave Wegner, got you. Okay.
Lawrence Lujan, yes.
Lawrence, thank you. Okay. All right. We've definitely exceeded the threshold.
Great.
Great.
Okay, please just leave them up for one more second so I can make sure I capture everyone. But if you'd like to go ahead, Carrie and Ed, and continue on, I will put a note in the chat for everyone when you can go ahead and put your hand down.
I think Mariana, you wanted to say something. I think that's what the chat said. It just
Yes,
wanted to-
well, it looks like we definitely have some support for this work group. But I just wanted to maybe, I'm not sure if I have the bandwidth to be on this work group, or I'll try to if I can, but as a state employee who has to put these dollars on the ground, and especially when there's a tight turnaround time, I really would ask that the work group, when they look at their charges, to really look at existing programs already established, that this money can be funneled through. That will help on the infrastructure, the people infrastructure within EPA and states to really have the ability to make these dollars work and get on the ground quickly. So that's just my 2 cents and advice as this work group looks at how to get this money out.
That's great, Mariana. Great reminder. And one thing the work group may decide to do once a charge is adopted in the work of the work group and the charge is underway, is, there may be folks like yourself who get interviewed perhaps, for their state experience and perspective. I don't want to prejudge what the work group obviously is how the work group is going to do its work or suggest the work be done. But we do have a lot of great expertise on the board that could be leveraged for guidance and input. So if I could ask for those, instead of chatting your interest, if you could please email me and Ed your interest in joining the work group so that we can capture that. That would be great.
Carrie, could I interject? When you are emailing Ed and Carrie with your interest, please copy EFAB at epa.gov so that I can make a record of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Well,
Okay.
Carrie, thank you for the interruption in the agenda.
Yes, no, very, very important. And we're here to support EPA and its work. So this is important work. So thank you for that interruption. Okay, so we'll go back to our regularly scheduled programming now. And we're going to turn our attention to the draft work product of the Opportunity Zone Working Group. And I'm going to turn this over to Margot and Bill, who have been co-leading this work. And just want to say how grateful we are to all your hard work on this, really excellent work quality, and excited to have you present it here and get feedback.
Thank you, Carrie. And thank you, Ed, and to the work group as well for helping us complete this or get close to completing this charge over a kind of a difficult time for everybody while COVID raged and lots of things were shifting on the ground and in the EPA. And I wanted to, Bill, before I pass it over to you, I just wanted to give Michelle and John at the EPA a chance to how they've seen the charge evolve over time, especially since I think we've got Michelle for a short time frame. So I'd love to hand it over to you two to give your perspective, please.
Sure. Well, I'll start it off and then hand it over to John Grosshans, who's in the Office of Policy. And, Office of Policy started discussing this as a potential charge back in 2020 when the opportunity zones was, there were a lot of questions about opportunity zones, both the designations and, sort of the ability of disadvantaged communities in particular to be able to leverage that private investment opportunity through opportunity zones financing. And so really excited to have the opportunity to work with you all on this and through the evolution, actually, with what started as a charge for, a question about how EPA can help economically distressed communities, communities with environmental justice concerns, small rural communities, be able to participate and benefit from the opportunity zone, the opportunity available. So how could EPA play a role in that? And I really am excited, and I know John probably has some stuff to add to this, just that it's evolved to be more broad about EPA's role in helping these same communities with the most kind of challenges and environmental justice concerns, take advantage and leverage other kinds of investments like opportunity zones, but not just opportunity zones. So really, really impressed with just the tenacity and working on this and really helping shape something that's going to be evergreen for EPA, kind of outside of just the opportunity zone moment, but for other moments that already maybe are presenting themselves right now at EPA. So I'll stop there and just say thank you in advance. And then, yeah, John, is there anything you want to add?
I think you both nailed it. This has definitely been a project that has shifted a little bit over the last few years, and broadening it was definitely a good outcome from this discussion, so that it can not only speak to some of the pre-development and other capacity building opportunities that are out there, but also the conversation that was just had already today on what is coming next. How does the next set of tax credits, the next set of programs that are being deployed, that are some big dollar programs, how do those maybe take some of that same takeaways from this work into that next set of programs?
Thank you both for the feedback, and we look forward to continuing feedback from you and your colleagues in advance of finalizing recommendations here. And as well, would like to invite all the EFAB members as well as work group members, to continue to send ideas on examples our way to include here, because we did end up with kind of a broader perspective with this charge. And happily, there have been a number of recent initiatives led by the EPA that have dovetailed really nicely with some of the recommendations that the work group has come up with, and we hope to continue to see that. I think I'll kind of do the TLDR version here and then pass it to Bill, but where we landed is in terms of what's the role that EPA is uniquely situated to play in facilitating the flow of opportunity zone related capital into what we're terming high priority communities, which include those with environmental justice concerns, low income communities, and communities with predominant people of color. Is that the EPA has an enabling role to play, but not a direct matchmaking role to play. And the enabling role is actually really, really powerful. Because it's kind of setting the preconditions, and it's really seeding the ground for communities to determine what the best sources of capital, private capital and public capital, are to complete their projects, and source them accordingly. And in prioritizing these communities, it means that the EPA, is really uniquely capable of helping them get to the point where they can access multiple different streams of prioritized funding for these communities, in addition to opportunity zone capital, which is not kind of universally applicable to all communities and projects. So we were really grateful for the insights of our expert panel as part of this charge, practitioners who develop projects and invest in projects in opportunity zones and raise money from investors along those lines. And they provided us with some really great thoughts and examples, which I think are applicable to other conversations, including the proposed GHG fund conversation. And really grateful for all the feedback that we've gotten from the working group and the EPA so far. And specifically, actually, to Mary Ann's point, would welcome any additional refining of examples and recommendations that capture the capacity at the state EPA, state and local EPA levels. We tended to focus more on what we were seeing at the federal level and would really welcome that perspective. So with that, I will pass it over to Bill.
Thanks, Margot. And just to add a few of my perspectives, I do want to thank particularly all the members of our work group. It was an interesting journey over the last several years as we worked with EPA and Michelle and John in crafting the charge. But as Margot indicated, we learned a lot in the process as we drilled into aspects of how opportunity zone funds and investors are view these types of projects and how they can take advantage of the designation of opportunity zones. And some of those challenges really helped us evolve the charge to get to a point to, instead of focusing just solely on opportunity zones, identifying areas where EPA can be more broadly engaged and to optimize the ability of disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities to really take advantage of opportunities that will help them secure investment in development within their communities that has overarching effects on even their, say, water and wastewater infrastructure, as the successful opportunity zone projects can enhance the revenue base of a struggling utility and expand their opportunities to reinvest in their infrastructure to secure more resilient and long-lasting, sustainable environmental services to their community members. I think I really appreciate your work, Margot, and particularly in helping pull all of this together in our draft work product. And again, the comments and perspectives of each of the work group members, as well as the EPA, and helping us assure that we are in alignment with their expectations, and also providing a product that can be implemented and followed in not only for opportunity zones in the future of opportunity zones, but other programs as well. So I'm not sure if we want to provide this at this point to see if there are any questions. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review the draft that was provided, and see if there are any questions that members may have, or if any of the members of the work group would like to have any comments that they would like to make as well. So maybe start with the work group. So I think Dave Zimmer, I see your hand up. So Dave.
Hey, Bill. So welcome back. I'm assuming you all can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. So I wanted to touch a little bit on Margot's point about, you focus on EPA and the federal level. There are certainly a couple of programs that EPA coordinates with the states to get done. One of the big ones is the State Revolving Fund Program, which I think most people are familiar with. That's the funds that come in for the clean water and the drinking water, the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act that get passed through to the SRF grantees, the DEPs, the EPAs, the financing arms within each particular state. So I represent New Jersey's SRF program with our DEP. And I can just tell you from our perspective, dependent on the state, and these are very state specifics because we all have very different statutes, legal frameworks, et cetera. Some states leverage, some states do not. So even though we all have the same authority through the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, we don't necessarily implement them in the same manner. But states like New Jersey, we're already facilitating infrastructure components of certain redevelopment projects, particularly in the clean water SRF, where we're allowed to make loans to non-public entities, okay? But nonetheless, from a credit perspective, we've taken that and we call these conduit loans for redevelopment projects. But at this point and throughout our entire history, we have always required that a public entity step in between ourselves and the redeveloper, who's going to give us an LLC that doesn't have any assets, any cash flow behind it before the project's built. So that's why we require a public entity to be our borrower. But so you think about it, particularly for stormwater management projects like on-site green infrastructure projects or remediation of brownfield sites. This would be a classic for an EJ community redevelopment OZ zone project, right? Land caps for vertical structures. So while we're not allowed to finance vertical structures or components of vertical structures, certainly the infrastructure underneath it that supports it, we've got some opportunities there. So there are a number of different ways that states like New Jersey already do finance components of redevelopment projects. It's not a stretch then for us to take this concept and expand it to opportunity zones, and particularly the way the law is written, focus on communities that are experiencing environmental justice concerns, disadvantaged communities, et cetera, right? And so, you know, in our paper, we highlight EPA's unique role, focus on enabling conditions. And anybody that's ever dealt with redevelopers, you know that the way to their heart is through their wallet. And that means you're either going to decrease risks or you're going to increase their return. So as an SRF program, I would tell you that things that we do right now that would benefit some of the stuff that we've listed in that paragraph from a risk perspective. When we do a project, we certainly require that all of your permits are in order before we lend you a single dollar, right? But we also prioritize projects in the state that are coming in for permits. Our projects jump to the front of the line, right? So you get certainty on, first of all, you're going to get certainty that the infrastructure components are going to be financed. So you take that off the table. And then from a permitting perspective, well, we won't handle all of the permits, certainly the permits that deal with the water components. You can rest assured that all of those permits will be handled, and you've got an advocate working on your behalf at either the state EPA or the state DEP to make sure that those permits are obtained. Okay, now it's certainly dependent upon the project sponsor, the community, et cetera, to work with us to give us the information to get the permits done. But we actually make sure that that gets done because we want to see the loan get made, and we can't make the loan without it. From a return perspective, we're all different. So I'm going to stress right now that this is only in New Jersey, but the way that we structure our program and the way that we make loans, et cetera. And of course, this is dependent on where interest rates are. And my God, every day you turn around, they're up another 5 basis points or something like this. So at a point in time, if you're coming through our base program, which means you basically get to borrow funds at 50% of where a AAA municipality or county would borrow funds. We estimate that right now, you would end up saving 36% of the cost of the infrastructure project by financing the project through us, as opposed to if you went out, you are a single A rated community, which is probably a pretty good average for most municipalities. If you went out and borrowed all of those funds on your own for that component, for that infrastructure project, 36%. Thanks to the BIL funds and the way that we're setting up our program, if you have environmental justice concerns or you're a disadvantaged community, you meet the affordability criteria, and you're going to get roughly half of those funds for free. You wouldn't have to pay them back. So in the other half you get at our AAA rate, right? We estimate that instead of saving 36%, just add another 50% to it, right? Because you don't have to pay that back. You'd save 86% of the cost of your infrastructure project by coming through the SRF program and getting it done, as opposed to borrowing those funds on your own. From our risk perspective, we also, and this is a big thing with the BIL funds, we're all scrambling right now on this whole concept of early technical assistance, right? This is almost a new industry in and of itself. We've all been involved with trying to help people with engineering designs and engineering, planning and design, right? But we've never gone before that. Like, what's the strategy that that you need? What are you missing? What kind of operational processes do you have to change to optimize? So then really, what kind of capital project are you going to look like, right? And we're all focused because the BIL requires that we make sure that these funds come out to communities that have these environmental justice issues. And there's a lot of those communities that have never come through an SRF program before. So how do we reach them? So we're in the process right now of, I think, developing this early TA sector of the construction industry that is directly applicable to what's going on now with opportunity zones, right? So that to the extent that we're going to go out, and trust me, we don't have the skill sets. We're not looking to obtain the skill sets. We're going to go out and third party this, right? So we're going to go out, we're going to hire consulting operators. We're going to go out and hire consulting public relations and put them together to work with us and our EJ communities so that those people have plans in place so that they can come in with engineering concepts to get these funds. That will be directly applicable in the long run. And I know that Radhika and her entire team are looking at EPA kind of spearheading this from a federal level. Sorry about that. So again, from a risk perspective, if we take that piece off the table, right, and we're involved with these communities in helping them, and we'll take the lead from a government interaction perspective, right? Because you would anticipate that you're probably going to have the economic development authority of a particular state involved, that you won't just have the DEP involved. You might also have a community affairs group in the governor's office involved, right? And again, there are a lot of SRFs out there in order to make sure that our projects get financed, that we step in as an advocate for our borrowers to make sure that these things get done, right? So they've got a familiarity with us because most of them come in and borrow through us for their water system. And if we're their advocate, working as kind of the lead for the other government units within the state, again, you're going to cut down a lot of the duplication of efforts and risk that things get dropped, et cetera. So I think this is so much more than a federal issue. It is a federal issue coordinated with states. I think the SRFs are in a fantastic position, especially with the funds coming in through the BIL, to act as both an intermediary, an advocate, and an outright financier for components of these projects on behalf of these communities for the opportunity zones.
That's a great example, David, and thank you for going into detail on the kind of tactics and explorations. And I think that getting to that early stage TA is so critical to reaching communities that haven't benefited from a lot of new funding and existing funding programs in the past. And that kind of direct networking and relationship building is one of the reasons that one of our recommendations was to go through intermediaries who are operating at the state and regional level, such as SRFs and also EFCs. Knowing that that's not really where federal agencies typically operate, but to reach those communities and to get the funds where they're not going, that relationship network and relationship building is essential, as well as the early TA, or you'll never even see them in your pipeline. To your point, they've never applied and they don't have the planning capacities on hand to do so. So thank you for sharing that great specific example. And would love to open, send the invitation to anyone else to send us other examples, either in writing, which we can kind of put into an appendix, and or I think Carrie, you will let us know if we have time left on this agenda item today. But I'm going to guess we're sort of at the end, or am I off time?
You have till you have a few more minutes.
Okay, a few more minutes. Would anyone else from the work group or the overall EFAB like to join in the conversation?
And if I might, Margot, I just think, and I appreciate Dave's comments, because I think the importance of the states and the state SRF programs in this whole process is going to be essential. And as you indicated, the recommendation related to those third-party intermediaries, particularly the environmental finance centers, how they can play a role to help the capacity building element that could be accomplished through this, through the processes, that technical assistance in that pre-development stage that also overlaps into other programs as well. And so I think we do have time for any questions that any of the members of the EFAB have at this point. We can respond to those questions, and then you say that as we get additional examples, we can strengthen the appendix element of our work product.
And to remind the board, at our next meeting, our next regularly scheduled meeting, which the Federal Register notice will be out on shortly, we'll be voting on the final work product. So this is near final, as you hear Margot and Bill asking for feedback, examples, and this will be the final product that gets published out on the website and sent to EPA.
Yeah, and I think that's Carrie, you said exactly what I was going to say, is that in October, my hope is that you'll vote on this as a final product that we can actually deliver to EPA. So I think everyone should look at this and have comments for Bill and Margot. They put a lot of work into this, and I can tell you just behind the scenes, the work that they were doing on this is just tremendous. So I would urge folks to be ready for a vote on this at our in-person meeting in October. I think that's what Margot and Bill would want you to do, right?
So just a plug, as you're reviewing, if you've got other examples, please do send them in writing. I'm going to say for Margot and Bill, you guys have put so much into this. Please help them send comments or examples in writing so that they can very quickly, insert them. And this will have to, get published in advance of the meeting, publicly. And they've been through a lot, and we thank them so much for the hard work that they put in on this.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and I David's example is excellent, how to use the states. And I know one of the interests in this group and future charges is all this money coming in from infrastructure, the infrastructure bill. What does that mean to reach these community? I mean, David, you gave the examples, like that's not been the business, and like, how do we actually mobilize capital where it's needed and all the work that has to be done? So stay tuned on that. We'll be having a conversation in October about that.
Yeah, and on that point, Carrie, I think that's going to become really important as you look at other work in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as well, because these monies that the administration is really trying to get to the communities and folks who we have not been able to reach in the past. And I think that's the part that's going to be really difficult and challenging. And we're hoping that this OZ group work, and as David pointed out, a lot of the experience that we have on the SRFs and so on, and the new monies for the technical assistance as well, those lessons will help us with the future amount. And this is just huge amounts of money. So thank you, guys.
So it doesn't look like we have any other comments. So I think with that, are we ready to move on? Margot, Bill, thank you again for stewarding and shepherding this great work. And we look forward to bringing this forward at the next meeting for a vote for the final product.
And Carrie, I have to thank our EPA clients,
John
and Michelle
yes.
as well. I know they start, and I think those two actually have different jobs now. This project has been anyway. So thank you, thanks to them as well.
Yes, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the next draft work product. And this one we're handling a little bit differently. This is not the draft letter, but it is a walkthrough of the approach that the pollution prevention group is taking gather feedback on that. And then there will be circulated ahead of the October meeting, a draft recommendation letter, a la what we just saw from the Opportunity Zone group. So I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who's been chairing this group, and she'll walk us through, and she'll also include our EPA clients in the conversation as well. So Ashley, over to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Carrie. And I'm glad to be here today to present this work on behalf of our work group. We do have a slide deck. Yep, there it comes. Thank you so much. So I'll just run through this. We thought, since there were so many new members of EFAB that aren't familiar with this charge, that it would benefit everyone to just do a bit of review. So apologies to those of you that may have seen some of this previously, but we'll go through relatively quickly. We had a relatively small work group, but quite steeped in finance, which was great. You can see the leadership of the work group engaged with David Wadowski and his team in the EPA Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. And we've had a really, I think, rapid and streamlined experience going through this, and really that's by virtue of the engagement level that we've had from both the EFAB work group and the team at EPA. It's been really fantastic. So thanks to everyone for your great commitment, and particularly to David and Allison and Andrew and Tara and Ed and the team at EPA, as well as our outside advisors who have been really super helpful in helping us pull this together quickly. So next slide. So this charge looked at, relatively similarly to the charge that Margo and Bill just reviewed, quite a bit of overlap, and I think we'll have overlap with the charges going forward as well. Really looked at the gaps in funding for project implementation and scale, and particularly in this case for pollution prevention projects that are endemic in the manufacturing sectors in the United States. And David's going to give us a bit of an overview on what precisely we mean by that. But that was really our overriding question, was how do we increase access to funding, recognizing that there are a lot of gaps in the market. And we boiled that down to some key questions, trying to identify what are the specific challenges that medium-sized businesses in the manufacturing sector face in attracting loans and other forms of capital. What approaches might they take? What role can EPA play in enhancing the capacity of the manufacturing sector to attract capital? And are there interesting models and extension programs that we might learn from in making recommendations to the P2 program? And our approach, similar to the OZ work group, was to orchestrate a series of workshops with the financial sector and then to develop a concrete set of recommendations. So we started this work in November of 2021, less than a year ago, and we're excited to be reporting out on it now. And next slide. I'm going to turn this over to David, who is on the line, to just give us a flavor about the P2 work, the background and constructs that his program uses in employing their projects.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks to everybody on the amazing EFAB work group. Just been such a pleasure to work with you over the past year. And so kind of the setup on this is that when we look at, what is the some of the preferable ways to manage and deal with promoting environmental progress and environmental performance, we use something, one of the heuristics that we employ is this upside down pyramid called the waste management hierarchy. And it come from an environmental standpoint, what are the preferable ways to be dealing with environmental progress, starting with the idea that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound or more of managing waste, either through reuse, recycling, treatment, or disposal. What's interesting is when you then start to look at what is the business case for environmental protection, pollution prevention, often rises to the top because it has the opportunity to reduce the costs of managing that waste. And as we look at more and more demand for sustainable supply chains, sustainable value chains, the opportunities for market positioning, preferable purchasing, and revenue enhancement through market access, pollution prevention, and sustainability become a strong driving force. In our pollution prevention grant program that predated the bipartisan infrastructure law and has been going on since the establishment of the Pollution Prevention Act in 1990, we have in the last few years been focusing on a set of industries, and part of the reason for that is to be able to manage, leverage, and amplify successes from some entities, facilities, businesses in one part of that sector to other businesses in that sector, whether it's in the same state or a distant state, through our pollution prevention networks and the organizations that we support through that. We're currently focusing on 5 industrial sectors that are pretty broadly identified, and they represent a lot of the potential for pollution prevention: food and beverage manufacturing, automobile manufacturing, parts manufacturing and maintenance, aerospace, similarly manufacturing parts and maintenance, fabricated metals and chemicals processing and manufacturing. So those are some of the bigger industries in the United States with large original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, but also a lot, in some cases, tens of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses. And so that's really the focus that we're looking at in terms of how do we identify with our technical assistance programs that we provide through our pollution prevention grants that got a $100 million boost under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And how do we help those companies identify not only from a technical standpoint the pollution prevention opportunities within their sectors, but then how do they make the business case for it and potentially then accelerate adoption? And one of the challenges that we come across from a number of the smaller businesses is that they're looking for low-hanging fruit because those are the easy things to afford. You know, whether it's changing out light bulbs or getting low-flow water faucets, that isn't going to move the needle for some of these manufacturers in these sectors, both in terms of environmental standpoint and economic opportunity. And so some of the questions that come up for us are, you know, when you look at a pollution prevention activity so that you're reducing either the emissions or the management of wastes, is it a revenue increasing? Is it market access and a market growing opportunity? Is it a cost reduction activity? And then how do you monetize that in the context of financing debt or servicing financing? How do you deal with fragmentation when you've got a lot of small companies that may be below the fixed cost threshold for a financing organization to support and engage in financing for that activity? What is some of the technical expertise, not just in terms of the engineering or pollution prevention activities, but technical expertise and familiarity with the finance industry? And how do we help those small, medium-sized manufacturers work with the finance industry from a technical standpoint, understanding what's needed? And then how do we recognize what are some of the underwriting risks that the finance industry needs to attend to in order to create an opportunity for some kind of a deal, you know, whether it's a compact or whether it's a stacked set of financing. And so what we've come up with is identifying some specific questions that we would have as a program to help accelerate and move forward with the opportunities we see in pollution prevention. And those are listed on the right-hand side of the slide. How do you look at different financing structures and models to increase financing? How do we take sector-based approaches? You know, and are there economies of scale in financing through bundling or other methods? And how do we support the expansion of financing and assistance programs, in some cases through those delivery mechanisms? And the idea, again, being with the opportunities that face us with our expanding programs is trying not only to identify pollution prevention opportunities, but actualize that through the financing and adoption of those financing opportunities. So that's kind of what we came into that conversation. And the timing is really optimal for us for this engagement, because in this last year, we have been implementing our first round of grants. We announced a couple of weeks ago, 71 pollution prevention grants that are starting to be active in the next couple of months. And we're going to be having a workshop with all these grantees in December, talking about how to support them and help them in realizing the efforts they're taking with businesses in their states. And finance and financing of pollution prevention is going to be an important part of that conversation. So the recommendations that we get from EFAB are going to immediately be applicable and valuable to our whole pollution prevention program at EPA. And with that, I'll turn the talking stick back over to Ashley.
Thank you, David. So as you all can see, there's quite a bit of pre-thought that went into this engagement, and it's been great to iterate on these questions and definitions and clarify what it is that we're talking about when we say various things. So I'm going to just crank through the rest of this presentation. We want to try to get to questions in about 10 minutes. So bear with me as I don't give much detail on the slides. For anyone interested, they can jump back in. In terms of our source reduction examples, trying to just understand precisely what the program that David and his team run has been doing to date, we really took a finance sector lens to the analysis. So looking at projects that had been funded by community development finance institutions, projects that had been funded through collaboration with state programs, and projects that had been funded by commercial enterprises. And we sort of dug into and pulled apart the facets of those cases and identified various qualities that allowed those projects to get funded. And as David said, really a lot of this work was focused on identifying where we could find cost efficiencies and potentially where we could find performance enhancements. The performance enhancements being a more difficult place to focus than the cost efficiencies, but both are certainly important. Next slide. We did do quite a bit of research generally. These two reports that are pointed out here are certainly good sources. The point here is just that we focused our research, and we think it's critical that EPA continues to focus on, which it does, sectors that have high environmental footprints related to energy, water, and toxic chemical releases. Goes a little bit without underscoring, but it's important that we maintain the critical sector focus where there's going to be the highest return on investment of time, capacity, etc. Next slide. On the right-hand side of this slide, we spent quite a bit of time looking at what was underlying the project types that would qualify for P2 financing funding, and teased out that often the projects involve process management, involve materials substitution, involve manufacturing modifications, and resource recovery. So it's easy to say pollution prevention, but all of us in the finance sector know that you have to get underneath that and say, what are we precisely doing to create a pollution prevention opportunity? In many cases, that activity is replacing a process or a technology at the manufacturing level. So it was important for all of us just to clarify that. And then work within the confines of the current EPA P2 programs. So we'll get into a little more of that boundary setting as we get further into this overview. Next slide. We had a really incredible 3-forum series that invoked the minds of an incredible selection of people across largely the finance sector, but also we had some really interesting people from industry and from public policy, both on the executive side as well as the policy side, engaged in these conversations, and it made for a really robust exchange. So I would encourage anyone who wants to dig in a little deeper to focus on these next few slides, and also as part of our deliverable, we'll be providing links to the actual forums. They're quite interesting. Perhaps not as interesting as a Netflix series on a Friday night, but they're interesting to listen to. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the takeaways on each of the forums. Next slide. The first forum was really a macro level look at what are the issues facing the financing of fragmented, hard to reach sectors writ large. So again, this is where we overlap quite a bit with Bill and Margot's work and other work that this group, I believe, will be doing as we try to reach environmental justice communities, fragmented communities, hard to reach communities. We're really talking about things that are pretty familiar to those of us in the finance world, and probably most of us on this call. It's really about credit risk, P&L factors, technology risk, lack of clarity in business case studies around cost savings and ROI implementation. We also have fragmentation risks. We talked in this first forum about just some high level reaching into some of the mechanisms. The most obvious mechanism that comes to mind is a loan guarantee. The finance sector loves loan guarantees. We all know that they make it a lot easier to do loans if you have a guarantee behind it, but we didn't want to just focus on that as the end all, partially because that's not an existing capacity of the P2 program as it's currently configured, and partially because that's just not, that's one piece of a very complex, one potential solution to a very complex ecosystem of finance. And so reducing credit risk through loan guarantees put that stake in the ground, but we also looked at potential structuring solutions in terms of ESCOs and CPACE models that use tax policy or other funded structures to reduce risk and allow more capacity. We spent quite a bit of time looking at technology risk, which was, and ways to reduce technology risk, which was really interesting to me, a bit of a new slant on investing in these solutions. And then also just looking at the ecosystem of different types of organizations that are actually currently working together in really innovative ways in some markets. In other markets, they're not working at all, but we have some examples of places, geographies, and actors who are working together in really innovative ways. So we took these top line directions and then moved into the next workshop, which we'll go to on the next slide, which dug into, next slide, thank you, dug into a little more, did a little more of a deep dive on specific tools and approaches. And again, looking at third-party certifications as a way to mitigate technology risk. Really interesting suggestions and ideas from Catherine Sheely, who's at UL. We looked at their circularity portfolio and how they've used technology certification just to basically give a broad-based verification of different approaches within sectors that investors can quickly get comfortable with. Brad Fletcher, who's with the Illinois Finance Authority, gave us a really incredible insight into how the commercially property assessed clean energy program has been put together, both in the state of Illinois and in other places. And then we looked at green banks. I know that's part of our next charge coming down the pike. So we did quite a bit of digging around the green bank sector already and how they use their capacities to expand financing, particularly in the energy efficiency sector. And then CDFIs came back over and over and over again as an area where we can expand capacity to grow the financial webs out to these target communities. All right, I've got about 2.5 more minutes, so I'm going to race even faster. Carrie, next slide. And final conversation was, again, just looking at how in various situations, we have incredible partnerships that are advancing out in the market with the private sector, the public sector, the green bank sector, the CDFI sector, the commercial banking sector, states. It's really extraordinary, the examples that we have and the potential to learn from these examples and potentially replicate, adopt, et cetera, around what's working in these examples. So that really led into our recommendations I think is our next slide. Yes, we're getting toward the end here. We segmented our recommendations into 3 major categories. And again, with a really, I'd say, important caution, important level of caution around what EPA and the pollution prevention program right now today have the capacity to execute. And so when we look at the P2 grant program, which, as David said, is already a robust, well-functioning program, we think there's some immediate opportunity to focus that program around grant making that would specifically address the opportunities and challenges that we've now together identified in the pollution prevention sector. So we believe that there's a really ripe opportunity to focus the next round of P2 grants on grantees with specific expertise in the sectors that have advanced some level of case studies, financial capacity, and made some inroads into accessing capital. And I know that the team at EPA is working really hard to identify some of those case studies and leaders in the market right now. We think there's an opportunity to put some more of the grant money specifically behind that. And that could potentially lead to a strategy that funds cohorts of grants in a particular industry or particular geography. This is not a new strategy to federal grant making. It's a strategy that I know has worked really well at USDA because I've been involved in one of the cohorts with the Conservation Innovation Grant Program. It's a really interesting way to create cross-sectoral capacity in and collaboration through a cohort type of grant making. So those are immediate P2 program grant opportunities. We think there's a second area of education and training. This is work that the P2 program is already doing, but we think we could sharpen the pencil on that work and advise the program to develop really concrete sector-based use cases through grant making and through targeted RFPs to consultants that are around the digging into the case studies. And I know the staff at EPA has been working on that. It's a really big undertaking to do these really robust case study examples. So we think there could be an opportunity to also build that into sector-based grant making and or consulting engagement. And then to the extent that there's the capacity to develop a series of webinars that are specifically focused on P2 success cases. So we had spoken early on in our recommendations with David and the team at EPA about doing a sort of prepackaged education series. And where we came out on it was actually that what people really need to see is success cases in the flesh and understand the challenges and opportunities that exist in those success cases and how they were overcome, what the various facets of the projects were that overcame the challenges that exist. And then last but not least, risk reduction mechanisms. Again, we think really interesting opportunity to launch a technology certification program around some of the priority interventions, perhaps in a focus sector. We think that the P2 program could develop some underwriting standards for specific waste streams within specific industries that start to drive some clarification into the supply chains for these manufacturers who are asking the questions about how do they bring in additional capital. And then, of course, we would be remiss to not mention that we really suggest a serious exploration of existing and new credit enhancement opportunities, both within EPA, potentially leveraging the EPA SRF funding, but also within SBA, USDA, other state level programs, Department of Energy. There are a lot of programs that are out there that are directly relevant to this work. So in summary, by our next meeting together in person in Denver, next slide, we will be making more formal recommendations in terms of a written pollution prevention financing recommendation letter, which will mirror the letter that you all mirror in format, at least the letter that you all just received from the OZ group. We also have the recordings of the forums, as well as a quite comprehensive now resource package that the EPA group and consultants have pulled together, as well as a version of this PowerPoint for those who don't enjoy reading memos. And that, in summary, is where we've come out. And thanks again to my great work group. And Carrie started out as my co-chair before she was stolen to chair our entire group. So thank you, Ed, for taking her. She's very talented, and she and I have really enjoyed working together with our group and David to make this happen.
Small but mighty group. You all have done really a fantastic job, and I was just so impressed with the panel, the series that, the way you conceived of the series with EPA, framed out the problems, created, a set of forums that tackled some of the different aspects. The speakers and the interaction was fantastic. And I think it's made for a really great set of recommendations. So thank you for leading the charge, Ashley, and for Craig and Stacy and well, it was Chris Meister, but Chris rolled off.
Well, I'll just add that, Carrie, that I just echo the enormous sort of compliments that I want to give on this. But the one thing that I want to recognize, Ashley, is that the format of the webinars, and to be able to bring all this perspective that's beyond the board membership, I thought was really amazing. And this was just taking advantage of our virtual tools. And I think this is going to be an innovation that we'll continue to use going forward, and really increases transparency for the board. And I think for a federal advisory board, this is a really fantastic innovation in my mind. So thank you for that as well. And of course,
planting David a seed around greenhouse gas reduction fund charge, one might imagine a similar construct being used.
Yeah, and also I just want to commend David and Allison for being just fantastic EPA clients on this as well, because I know they were very much engaged in
wonderful
the work every step of the way. So thank you as well. So before you go to the questions and answers, I wanted to make sure that I had time to say all that.
Thank you, Ed. So, so as Ashley mentioned, there will be a recommendation letter that will, put in words what Ashley just took us through, that will be available for feedback. But it would be enormously helpful for Ashley and Stacy and Craig and Allison and David to hear any feedback from the board today on the direction before they put words in a letter. So any questions or comments? Shock and awe, Ashley.
We just
David.
nailed it.
Shock and awe. You nailed it.
Come on, guys.
I mean, this is a group that always has feedback.
Yeah, we love feedback.
And just because of where you are in this stage for this particular work group, I think Ashley, you will have opportunity to take feedback offline, right? Before the next meeting. Okay.
Absolutely, and welcome it. Obviously, that goes without saying, welcome feedback.
And I know that, Ashley, you're going to try to get a draft letter out to the board, in advance of our next meeting, so that you could also, get feedback on the letter as well.
Yep.
Angela.
Thank you. I don't have any questions for the committee, but I just wanted to thank them for their work, and definitely saw a lot of connections in terms of lessons learned. I almost feel like it's foundational for some of the other charges. So keep going, and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela.
Margot?
Thank you. This is really exciting. Especially I applaud you for going down the rabbit hole on the credit enhancement side in more detail. My primary thought was really just a recommendation potentially to look at some of the value chain work around financing solutions in food waste that ReFed has led. Kind of a different focus, not so much on the kind of contaminants that you guys are focused on, but I think their framework and analysis and the way that they did it in conjunction with industry and civil society and the USDA, right? It's like
It's
it was
like
very
that ecosystem.
it's the
bringing
ecosystem
together.
approach. Yeah. They're also launching a catalytic capital fund to like a la Prime Coalition to start seeding some of the stuff that the conventional market capital won't bear, which could be another interesting model that Prime, initially really pioneered. Might be something I'll look at.
So I know one thing, Ashley, we all should talk about with David and Allison is like our recommendations on the P2 grant program and kind of signaling what those grants could go towards. It's that sort of thing. Bring us your ideas to pull together the right folks who are going to, in a geography or in a sector or technology or what have you, whether it's the Prime Coalitions or a CDFI or state or whatever, just let that ecosystem building. And then David and his team and Allison, they can lift those models up, promote them, and hopefully we can see them replicated across sectors or across geographies. So we may need to think about how we can describe that, because that's really what we were aiming towards in those, where the grant dollars can be put towards. So David and Allison don't have to create a new grant program. It's more signaling the sort of things that they would be willing to fund. And I think that's exactly the sort of examples that we were thinking of in other sectors.
Yeah, it's such a good example, Margot. Thank you for that. And I'm familiar with both Prime Coalition and ReFed. And actually we are involved, I privately, with my I2 Capital hat on, are involved in another catalytic capital fund that's being launched with USDA around the value chain infrastructure for ag BMPs. So there are interesting models that all have a different flavor, but we should definitely look into those, David, and give you all some clarity around how those value chains have come together in real time.
Yeah. And how can you and your program signal, hey, we'll be a funder. Obviously, you're not going to fund 100% of it, but we'll be a catalytic funder for these models. Yeah.
Yeah. Super
Stacey,
helpful.
did you want to mention anything?
I think we've covered it. I mean, I think I in particular focused more on mitigating of underwriting risks, and I think Ashley and Craig in particular, and you, Carrie, more focused on the financial side of things, which was really helpful to me because that's not my area of pure expertise. But I think just being more sector focused and making sure that we have some standardization, I think will make it a lot easier for this to go forward, because I think it's such a broad topic, and narrowing down the focus, I think, is going to be critical for us going forward to make this a successful charge.
And you can imagine it exactly right, Stacey. That makes the certification with the de-risking and the underwriting and and then the various partners that you need for a particular sector. It allows you to kind of line up all the dominoes and get the momentum that you want.
Yeah, and then I think if we can get this down in a sector or particular sectors, it can be repeatable for other sectors and other types of waste streams and industries. So it's exciting, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
I would just say it for our working group, it was just so interesting. Like we all wanted to dive in and create the products, but of course that's not our role. But that's all how we all, and none of us were experts in pollution prevention, but it was really kind of fun to work on together. George. You're on mute, George.
great work, team, and Ashley, great work on spearheading this. One question, and I've seen it in some of the enterprises that are involved with kind of pollution prevention dynamics, is trying to understand the embedded carbon savings and the linkage with all the monies that we see, i.e. the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund or others. Is there an opportunity to maybe draw a linkage in that regard relative to potential funding and support on that side of the equation? Because I know the EPA P2 program has had limited authority in that regard.
Yeah, George, it's a really excellent point. And that did come up repeatedly. I kept sort of pushing back, like, no, this isn't just carbon, but that is a real focal point and opportunity for all of us. And in fact, we had a really interesting contribution by Martin Chilcott, who's the founder of Manufacture 2030. And that whole effort is around carbon, largely in the in the US automotive sector. And OEMs and the OEM supply chain, and how the OEMs are driving preferential supplier financing and treatment. Can I say that? Preferential treatment? Yeah, I can say that. are basically because the OEMs in across these sectors have made commitments to reduce the carbon footprint and other water and agriculture pollutant footprints of their sectors. And so, yeah, carbon is a big opportunity that will continue. So thank you for making that point.
And Carrie, if I may just interject on George's comment about with respect to Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I mean, at the end of the day, that's going to be a very, very significant issue because of the accountability. Because I think, a lot of folks are talking about financial accountability of monies that are going out, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to demonstrate that the billions that we're putting in is resulting in greenhouse gas reductions, which means that we have to have the information and the systems and standards and accountability on how to measure it. And all of that is going to, I think, kind of bleed into some of the work. And that's why I think the work group who's going to work on the charge, I think will have some important work to do, because there's so much that you can actually work on that they'll have to kind of figure out what the parameters are going to be around what the board will consider. So anyway, I just wanted to interject, because I think as I was watching Ashley's presentation, I can already see how much of what the P2 group has done and the OZ group has done is going to help with the board's ability to deal with the next task that's before us. So
yeah, that's right. So we are close to time, and we want to end right on time. So I think we'll close out feedback. You know how to reach the P2 group, and you'll see a written draft of the package in a couple of weeks, and you can comment on that ahead of our next meeting. So thank you, work group, and thank you, David and Allison. It's been a really great experience. And I believe that takes us to the end of our business. Do we have anything else on our business calendar? I don't believe so.
we do not. I think that's we've covered everything with 2 minutes to spare. I think that's really great.
Great. Yay. It's always gratifying to have like these work product meetings, right?
Yes,
the culmination of a lot of hard work. And so it's wonderful. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, everyone. So just before we go offline, a couple of things to mention. One is really to get back with us regarding the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund work and the exploratory work group interest. I think Carrie and I are already receiving lots of emails about it. So thank you for that. The second thing is that we are continuing our planning for our hybrid meeting in Denver. So we look forward to seeing all of you if you can make it. If not, it'll be in a hybrid format, but we look forward to seeing all of you soon. And that's the dates you already have, and we'll announce that in the Federal Register notice for everyone else who's watching this. The official notification will be coming out in a couple of weeks. So thank you for that. I think with that, Carrie, unless you have anything else, I will gavel the meeting closed.
Gavel us out, Ed.
All
Thank
right.
you, and Tara, for your support.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. I'm closing our public meeting for the day. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.